This is what a 30-minute poker session looks like sped up and played in about 5-10 seconds. But throughout that session, the way that you truly get the biggest win rate possible is to stop and think at each and every opportunity. That's right, every time you have a decision to make, it's up to you to decide. Is it better to raise or is it better to call? Is it better to size your value bet for 12 big blinds or 20? You've got to make all of those decisions because in the real world, you are not indifferent between lines. Just because you saw your solver mix something at some frequency, that doesn't mean that that's what you should try to do. In fact, the way to get a truly big win rate in a game, like I'm trying to do right now, and I'll be showing you this at the end of 300,000 or 400,000 hands, is to just nail every spot. Figure out what your opponent's ranges are, use your theory skills to sort of lay the foundations, but then really figure out how to exploit them and how to maximize your EV in every situation. Challenge yourself, don't be lazy, think. I'm going to show you how to do that in this video. Let's go. Okay, hand number one. We face a min open with ace-7 of clubs in the big blind, and we're going to peel this one. 10-8-6, deciding here, facing a bet whether call or raise is better. Remember, so the way to get this really big win rate is to always ask yourself that question. And in this situation, I do think it's fairly close. Sometimes it'll be close, sometimes it won't be. But I opt just to call here. And the reason is that when they bet half pot there, as opposed to third pot, it's very unlikely that they're just betting range. It's more likely that they have an equity-driven range. And generally, when regs at these stakes bet half pot or bigger, they are going to just have probably too few low equity bluffs and too many sort of flush draws, value bets, that kind of thing. So I think their range is actually a bit more equity-driven than it should be on the flop, just meaning that it has the higher equity draws more often than the lower ones. That's my exploitative take on that for most people. So decide just to call. I think this is fine. Obviously a call on the turn whenever you have a strong hand like this plus a redraw, you're not going to be folding to a turn barrel. You want to call all your bluff catchers on the turn that have a decent redraw pretty much in every situation, apart from like when people jam and you think their range is like immensely strong and you just have to sadly fold. In most of those spots, you're always calling your bluff catcher. Now, when you face this, and this is something we talk a lot about in grade E of the Carrot Poker School, that's their exploitative grade. This is a line that is extremely texturally dependent and extremely positionally dependent. So the secret to knowing whether to bluff catch against a reasonable player's triple barrel here, obviously if the villain's a maniac, you just always call, and if they're a net, you always fold. But against a reasonable player, the way to approach this if you don't have any other info is to basically call down a lot if you're against a late position player. And that's because they start with too many offsuit Broadway combos like Queen Jack and King Queen and things like that that can be bluffing, and it's easier to overbluff. So given that villain is cut off as opposed to like under the gun here and can have Queen Jack off as opposed to never having that hand, yeah, there's definitely some incentive to call down here. If this was small blind or button, I think it's like a no-brainer, but against cut off, it's a bit closer. The other thing you want to consider is texture. Ace turn is one of these textures that does tend to get bluffed quite a bit. I'm giving you guys a ton of grade E secrets for free right now. If you want like the other 99% of the course, carrotcorner.com is the place to go for that. But low board with ace turn and brick river, pretty overbluff texture as well. So already we have like a neutral data point in terms of like the cutoff being the aggressor here. The texture is favorable for us to call down. Our bluff catcher is very good. We do block one combo of 9-7 suited, and we have an ace which blocks a ton of 2-pair and top pair. So very, very good pure calling hand in GTO, but we don't care about that, guys. We don't care about GTO, but there's enough good data points here that call is where I land. And yeah, that's how you make a decision. You don't just roll. You don't just say, I'm indifferent, I'm going to be lazy. You ask yourself, what are the data points here and what do they mean? And once you know what to think about, you can begin to make the right decision in these spots really frequently. Now, this call is probably winning, I don't know, a little bit. A couple of big blinds, something like that. And a hand like King Jack is obviously going to be in villain's range from any position. But if you imagine like Queen Jack off or something, or Queen 9 suited, that's not necessarily going to be in an early position range, but it could be in a cutoff range, or King 9 off, right? That's a great example of a hand that's 16 combinations, well, 12 in the offsuit variant, the suited variant's 4. That's another example of a hand that's not going to be in there from under the gun, but is from cutoff. So this really does dictate the lay of the land. It's like, where is villain actually aggressing from? Cutoff's somewhat neutral, but it's still on a texture like this where the main candidate bluffs are Broadway hands that whiffed. I think there's enough stuff like that that's offsuit, makes it more abundant in villain's range that you want to call this combo every time. Don't roll, don't mix. Figure out what's better. All right, next hand. I know for a fact that most of you watching this do not raise in this spot in the river because you don't raise thinly enough. Now, you may be watching this thinking, but I raise the river! Good for you. I'm happy for you. Truly am. That's great. But please do understand that many of your peers watching this don't. And have a bit of empathy for them right now. Okay? Don't be so damn rude that you take this to the comments and you're like, oh, it's obvious raise. What an idiot, coach. A lot of your peers don't race here. So I'm really happy for you that you race here on the river. But not everybody does. So have a little respect for the weaker players watching this, yeah? Have a little respect. We check the turn because we can, and I actually think it's better. That's right, I think it's better. Why do I think it's better to check the turn back here after flop goes check check with ace 10? The reason is that if villain has a worse ace than us, they're usually going to bet the river and we're going to raise and they're going to call. On most cards, maybe not this card. Secondly, if they do have some kind of draw that we're worried about quote unquote protecting against, they usually just lead too often on the turn. And if they have an ace, I actually think they lead too often on the turn as well. So their range, while it does contain a few hands like 6s or something, or 3x that we can get 2 streets against on a good day, most of their range on the turn is like air. It's like nothing. And people don't understand on brick rivers that they can't just lead all of their queen high and worse, lest they be overbluffing, especially if they're not slow playing turn enough. So the way to exploit that here is to check the turn with ace 10 and just let them do that. This sizing will be a lot of jack X, it'll be an ace sometimes. We clearly just chop here at worst most of the time. Very occasionally, I mean like once in a, not even a blue moon, but like a, what's even more rare than a blue moon, like a green moon, that's pretty rare. And it works with the clubs here. Once in a green moon, villain is going to have a flush, but for the most part, you're just chopping or winning against a jack, and a jack's going to pay you off here. People love to say stuff like, oh, if you raise, you'll never get called by anything worse. What a stupid thing to say. Like, of course a jack can call you here. All it has to do is not believe you. As it happens, we chop. Not really interesting, but yeah, you've got to raise that river. Hope that helps. If you already knew you could raise that river, congrats. You're on your way to being a good value raiser. I just want to show this hand because I want Lee with 3 eyes to understand what happened here. Because I don't want Lee with 3 eyes thinking that, you know, he or she is really clever here, or that they owned my soul. You don't get one over on the carrot, man. Don't do that. Says fan of you. Very kind. I search around in my emojis for a response, and because I'm a boomer, I can't. Oh, I did find the thank you quickly that time. Sometimes I'm like an old man, like, where's the thank you button? Where's the hello? This checks all the way to the river, and I have 5 high. And my gambit here is pretty damn simple. There's no theory to it. It's just, okay, if they have non-spades, there's a certain amount of people in the pool that will just quickly fold here, just muck and not really care. If they don't have a flush, or if they only have 1 pair or something like that. So this has to work 25% of the time. I'm hoping it might work around that amount of the time. Given this person's a fan, they probably know I do bullshit like this all the time with an air-heavy range, so maybe it's bad. But this is, you gotta give it up to Lee here. I love the heart. 14.6, like super quickly. I've got 5 high. I got 5 high, Lee. I can't call you. I know you think you bluffed me, and I folded the best hand here, but I did not. And your pocket deuces, you could have just called, and that would have been even more impressive. Yeah, you said you want to call. You should have just called. That would have owned me even more. Good job, though. I love your heart there. Another reason why it's so absolutely foolish and idiotic to try and play GTO strategies against random weaker players is that they give off timing tells left, right, and center. This weaker player like snap checks the flop, right? So they have a capped range, but they probably have showdown value a ton of the time. I really doubt that this is like 10-7 very often. Might be sometimes, but I think for the most part, it's probably going to be like a pocket pair, ace high, a queen, a bad king, a 6, something like that. Kind of showdown driven range. That said, with all of these backdoors, I'm going to bet, and because I'm only really building around top pair plus here for value, because I'm not really interested in reopening this spot with a queen or a 6, I just go for a uber sizing, right? So the pot sizing makes a lot of sense when that's the intention of my value range. The bluffs just follow suit. They're the passengers on the bus, the value hands are the drivers. Now, if we just go back and replay this flop timing here, remember, a lot of people in this pool know who I am now. They've seen this amazingly famous YouTube channel, so they're aware. And the flop timing was pretty damn fast, like what, 2 seconds? And I just have it in my head here that I'm probably not going to be believed that much. So while this is like a really good hand to bet turn with, in theory, you can bet turn with it. I think you can also check. Like, I don't think it's mandatory to bet here, although it will be really high frequency. I just kind of decided that on this turn, villain showdown value, queen X, etc. heavy range was probably not going to fold and was probably not going to believe me a lot of the time, just from the flop timing and from, I don't know, just people knowing who I am now and stuff like that. So I decided I would check here and not take this spot, because if the fold equity is like really low, then I'm still a dog here, you know? I'm still a dog. And my flush draw's jack high. It's not a queen high or king high or ace high flush draw, and both of those are possible here. the queen high and king high flush draw. So I'm not actually thrilled about the branch of the tree here where I build a giant pot, hit the jack high flush in the river, and then like I get coolered sometimes there, right? Like it's a good spot, but it's not like the best spot in the world. I only have the 4th best flush. What I thought instead was that given I think fold equity is kind of low here on average, just based on this turn card and the size I bet on the pot, the amount of filtering villain did there on the flop, sorry, the size I bet on the flop and the amount of filtering villain did on the flop and the speed of the call and just like the whole probably knows who I am thing, I decided just to check the turn. And then I got there and villain thinks for a couple of seconds, checks the river quickly. The odds of this being a slow play are infinitesimally small. If you're playing against a really good player, they will slow play the nut flush here. They will slow play the queen high flush and the king high flush because they block the calling range, they unblock bluffs, like they're going to do stuff like that. But in the real world, this is basically the nuts. So now, given that my read is that villain is probably not going to believe me, now that I've checked the turn, I just don't think it's at all believable that I have a flush. It now behooves me to find the right sizing to exploit that to the maximum. And my thought was I want to go for a sizing that's really, really big because it just looks very full of shit. And these aren't thoughts that you'll hear me say when I'm coaching poker theory, but in the real world, in street poker, you do have to care about stuff like this. You do just get a sense of what people are thinking and doing and how they're going to play, and the players with the really big win rates, they make use of those reads, and they listen to their instincts, their intuitions, and they try to find the very best line. Now, I don't even know if this is the best sizing, because if I'm going to go 28, could I not just go 32? Could I go up to 2x pot, somewhere just below that? I thought I wouldn't put like something that started with a 3 in the middle, but just make a big overbet, and I get snapped by queen 9. So in this case, live players love to say I was right or I was wrong when they called the river, but there I really did think I had a decent sense of what was going on, and I tried to use that sense to just find the best line. I'm going to show you this really boring spot. Hijack min opened, we called the big blind. The flop went check, check. I'm not actually going to, am I going to lead here? No, I'm not going to lead here. I'm going to check here. The reason being, like, ace-x never folds here. Some overcards may float me. I want to get a bit more information. I want to attack this range that checks back twice. This is the range I want to attack. This ace massively polarizes the opponent. The opponent doesn't really have in real life 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, 4x, anything like that, straight, a boat. None of these hands exist. What exists is either an ace or king high, queen high, 10 high, jack high, or 9 high. Given that I don't need to bet very big to fold out king high, queen high, and jack high because weaker players just play their absolute hand strength, they don't really hand read, I don't have to do anything here but third pot. Third pot needs to work 25% of the time, and I think like almost half a villain's range here is probably like king high, queen high, etc. Or maybe 40% of it. So I think my fold equity here is better than 33% when it only needs to actually be 25. So this is a bread and butter spot. It's boring, it's not very glamorous. Calling them in open pre might not even be on your charts, but who the hell cares? You're going to have a skill edge. You're going to be able to do things like this. Just open your mind and find the best play. This is how we generate big win rate. Find spots like that. Your red line will really thank you if you find great risk reward ratios like that where you only have to put a bit of money into the pot to get folds from a fairly abundant region of villain's range that's not sensitive to sizing. That's the ethos there. This spot's pretty bread and butter, but I think it's worth just looking at it quickly. We open 10-9 here, and a weaker player, I guess, calls a small blind of some description. Most small blind callers will be weaker players. It's not horrible to call in the small blind, but most regs just don't do it because they think it's horrible. 3 of spades on the turn, and yeah, I think the normal size here is overball. Obviously, the leak here that people suffer from is he won't fold an ace. I'm scared to overbet because like they won't fold an ace. They're not supposed to fold an ace. That's not what you're trying to make fold. There's loads of gut shots. There's 6x. There's pocket pair. There's jack-x. All of this will fold to an overbet pretty often. When weaker players call your turn overbet, the river will usually be underfolded. On most cards, maybe not on this card, because this is an incredibly good card for our turn overbet range because we have a lot of spades and a lot of queen 10 and stuff like that, and villain doesn't really have as much of those hands. Density wise, villain is kind of drowning in combos of ace 5 and stuff here, so this might actually be an overfolded spot, but that's not the point. The point is that generally speaking, this paradigm is true that when you overbet the turn and villain snaps and they're a weaker player, they're probably going to underfold the river where quote unquote nothing changed, right? Because they think, well, if I was good on the turn, I'm good on the river. That's their sort of recreational thought process a lot of the time. So value sizing here, I think we want to overbet again. We will sometimes just get stationed here by ace queen. People love to say, well, what's going to call me? You know, ace x will just fold now. It won't always. Like sometimes they just are really sticky. Fish can just be insanely stationy for no real reason. So we go for this. There's a lot of tanking here, so we'll speed this up. So they've tanked for like 30 seconds already. Imagine getting jammed on now. That would be really weird, right? I think we have to call a jam here because we only lose to like the jack high and queen high flush, but it'd be really sad. I don't know actually, but yeah, ace king. So pretty normal spot, but I wanted just to show you that overbetting the river there is good, and I wanted to mention that pattern that a lot of those spots are underfolded on most runouts after a weaker player calls your turn overbet. So in the last video, not the last video actually, like 5 videos ago, something like that, we had a little segment, a Tuesday segment, about 3 things you can do to exploit fish. I came to the conclusion that I'm still going to use the word fish, by the way. I think that it's a good, colourful term with a lot of rich poker heritage. I think it's really descriptive, and I think in all competitive sports, we should have ways of knowing how good people are. So like in chess, we have ELO, we have terms for that. We say things like master, grandmaster, national master, amateur, class A player, class B player. And that's not really like offensive. On poker, we say fish, we say reg, we say bad reg, good reg, crusher. We have these kind of terms as well. And I think to like call someone that wasn't good at chess a fun player would be just like fucking ridiculous. And I think it's the same in poker as well. I'm going to reject fun player, and I'm going to reject rec as well, because it's like too similar to reg. It is really annoying. And fun players are super patronizing. It's like, here's a guy that's not trying. The only reason he's not good at cards is he's not trying to be good at cards. He's a fun player. He's intentionally choosing not to be good at cards. Like, no, it's a fish. We're going to go with this. And if you're offended by it, the world is tough, man. You're going to be offended by lots of things. It's better to grow a thick skin, or scales, than it is to be offended by everything and post in the comments about how we shouldn't say fish. Just my 2 cents, my opinion. I'll do what I want. So there. Anyway, we have Ace King. And this is a hand that harks back to that Tuesday video about how to exploit fish. And specifically, it harks back to point number 2 of 3, which is that you shouldn't fold to weird small fish sizes. So this guy has a 41 VPIP, this carafe guy in the cutoff, or girl. They go ahead and bet 7.1 big blinds on the turn, and we call. Now, I think I should maybe just continue betting the turn with the ethos that I just do way better against calling ranges than I do against betting ranges, and I'm not actually ready to check fold here. So I don't actually like the turn check. I think the turn check is a mistake, actually, with Ace King. I think with the bad king, it's like not so bad. But with Ace King, I think we should just bet like half pot. We shouldn't bet big here, because Jack X can still exist. It doesn't always raise flop, but we shouldn't check either. I don't like this line. I was a bit unhappy with myself here. I got a bit annoyed at myself and a bit tilted on the river here, because I was like, God damn it, why did I not take more time on the turn and then figure out what to do? Because like in theory, sure, I can check, but this isn't theory. This is the real world, and I'm playing against probably 2 weaker players, and I want to figure out what the best line is, right? That's how we get big win rates once again. Against this third pot river bet, like clearly this sucks, right? Your first instinct is, well, this guy's called flop, bet turn, and bet river. I have a bluff catcher in GTO here. Like, I don't think this guy can bet any worse hand in theory here for value. Not when flop is 3-way, especially in an early position. So this is a bluff catcher in theory, and villain is never bluffing, basically. Never bluffing, right? I think that's fair to say. That villain never has air here. Maybe once in a blue moon he has like 5-4 of diamonds and made some absurd flop call. But generally speaking, villain never has air. So this is under bluff. The problem is that we have, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a merge beater. That's right. If you go back to that video on how to beat fish, we talk about merge beaters. And this is one of them. Look, I almost folded. I was like, GTO brain says fold. Cannot call because under bluffed. And I was like, hold on. This guy probably has like king 5. They had king 7 of diamonds. It's just, this is why you don't say no to like absurd pot odds against weaker players, because they're just going to show up with random stuff. All right, last hand of the video. This is a really cool one. I hope you'll take something out of this one. I think it's instructive. We have the ace jack of clubs. We have opened on the button. We've been 3-bet by a reg. Yellow tag signifies this is actually a reg. They check the flop, and this, in theory, is optional. Now again, this video is all about trying to find the best line. So just because it's optional, that doesn't mean that we should check, and it doesn't mean that we should bet. We should stop and say, in the real world, what's better? Well, these are my thoughts on monotone boards in general. I think they're overfolded, and I think they're underprotected. So when villain checks here, I don't think there will be enough combos of jacks with no club. That might exist sometimes, but I don't think there'll be very many combos of it. Would you guys think villain would have jacks with no club here? No, me neither. I wouldn't think that hand exists very often. I think there will be some slow plays, like the nut flush with 2 giant clubs, but I block a ton of those. And I think like bad flushes will usually bet. I think sets will usually bet. I think that the checking range will be underprotected. And whatever sizing I pick on the flop here, I expect way more fold equity in real life than I should get in theory. Therefore, when I actually have it, when I have this invincible value range that's blocking his continues and unblocking the air of the opponent, I'm just going to check. Because at this SPR, I can pot build the rest so easily from the turn onwards. And there's another thing here that I can sow some seeds of suspicion in the opponent's range by checking back the flop and then suddenly going nuts on the other 2 streets. Like, that doesn't look particularly believable, right? Believability is fairly low for this line, I would say. For people who are hand reading, they're probably going to think that I bet most of my good hands on the flop. That's generally how pool plays, right? So when villain checks again here, I think time has run out here and it's no longer feasible to slow play, because if I check back again, then I have to jam like 4.5x pot on the river to get the money in. So we just go for this sizing. I don't care about pot geometry here, or 2e, or betting geometrically. I don't actually care. I just want to pick some sizing, and then I will pick a river sizing. So villain calls, I'm going to go all in, because, you know, we have the nuts and it's poker, and when you have the nuts on the river, you should basically go all in at SPR 1.7 or whatever this is, 1.8, so you should just go all in here. So we do. The main thing I'm pointing out here is the flop play. I don't think the turn or river play is particularly important or relevant, as long as you just bet and put all your money in. You can't really go wrong. Look at that, guys. Look at that. The jacks without a club. The very hand that we didn't think villain could have. So yeah, there will be some hands like this, but when I get called here, I think I expect to see more like 10x, maybe like king 9 of clubs that just went for like a slow play, although I don't think that 3-bets a lot pre in these positions. Maybe it does. And then like aces. I think aces and kings I'm expecting to see more often than jacks, because jacks looks like it needs a bit more fold equity, and jacks and aces are like the same, you know, absolute hand strength hand, given that we have no queens or kings in our range. So I was a bit surprised to see the jacks here, but I can see why villain called down, because this line is like pretty unbelievable, right? Like I check back flop and then I just say I have a flush. Like it's very tempting to just bluff catch in spots like this. So believability is a really important factor when you're bluffing or value betting. The less believable your line looks to the average psyche of a person in the pool that you're playing in, you know, the more you should use that line for value, and the more believable it looks, the more you should use that line as a bluff. So just think about that when you're building your lines. Real life poker and having a big win rate is all about understanding what is best against humans. For a long time, I forgot that, you know, I was so obsessed with the theory that I was studying and making content in, that when I was playing at the tables, I would revert to some robot mode instead of really using my poker skill to think and hand read and put people on ranges and play accordingly. Don't do what I did. Avoid that mistake. Don't go into the GTO cave. I was in there for a couple of years. It was a nasty, dingy, wet, horrible, slimy place, and it was gross. There was like all kinds of pools of bacteria on the floor, and there was no light, and it was all fishy. And don't stay in the GTO cave. If you are in the GTO cave, there is light. Climb your way out. Walk towards the light, and thou shalt be saved. God, am I like portraying myself as some kind of god now? I don't want to do that. No. But yeah, get out of the GTO cave. Okay, hopefully this video has been useful. If you like our stuff, you know where to go. It's carrotcorner.com. Like, subscribe, comment. Really appreciate it. Much love, guys, and see you on a video very soon. Have a great Christmas and New Year and all of that. Bye-bye.